Lay, die, die, lay, die, die. Yay, die, lay, die, die, die. Yay, die, 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 die. Yay, die, lay, die, die. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is really about the Torah portion, because it's just such a juicy one, and I had, I've just been, it's just been so present for me, which is Ki Tissa. And we're in the midst of the book of Exodus, which for me is like just this important kind of revelation about what it means to be on the path, on the journey to freedom. And so I'll just back up a little bit and say, when I was in rabbinical school, it took me a very long time, because every time I had some kind of a deep question, I would take a year off of rabbinical school to explore that question. And the question, I went to the RRC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, which gave me a very good intellectual grounding. But some of my spiritual questions, there just wasn't time to really explore very deeply. And the question that I had was, what would it mean to do a spiritual retreat as a Jew? And because retreat was a really important practice for me. And I wanted to find what would be the authentic way of doing a Jewish retreat. And so I took this year off. I went up on my mountain in New Mexico. And first what I did was I did a series of retreats from in the context of other traditions. I did, a Buddhist retreat, a Christian St. Ignatius retreat. I had teachers come and teach me things about vision quest in the Native American tradition. I did a vision quest and shamanic journeys, and I did what's called a Sufi alchemical retreat. I did a series of alone retreats and some with other people. And then I contemplated this idea, what would it mean to do this process of retreat as a Jew? And what I came to was that the book of Exodus is our retreat guide. And I decided to study the book of Exodus as if it was going to be guiding me in the process of what it would mean to do a spiritual retreat. And I developed this 5-day process called the Exodus process. And I studied the text, and then and I divided that text up into 5 parts. And the first part, which is what I did on the first day of the retreat, was called just becoming aware of enslavement. And enslavement in the spiritual sense means conditioning, the ways that we are kind of have a narrow viewpoint because of what we've been exposed to, what we've learned, what our prejudices are. And becoming aware of enslavement means like becoming aware that we're in Mitzrayim, we're in a narrow place, and maybe we didn't even know it, just as the children of Israel were, for 400 years, they were enslaved before they even realized they were enslaved. And then what happens in the text is they cried out of that realization that they were enslaved. And suddenly it felt much worse. So the first day of the retreat is all about bringing an awareness to kind of a glimpse of what might be out there and a realization that we might be stuck. The second day of the retreat was all about crossing, about taking a leap of faith, about leaving the known and stepping into the unknown. And we have the midrash of Nachshon, who stepped into the waters up to his nose before the sea would split. And so all day long on the day of crossing, you take the walk of Nachshon and step from what you know into what you don't yet know. The third day of the retreat was about receiving revelation, opening up to insight, really opening to the spirit of guidance as we come to Sinai. Actually, the third day, no, that's the fourth day. The third day of the retreat was about purification, like what we need to do to get the, even if we're free on the outside, there's layers and layers and layers that are not free on the inside. And so the third day of the retreat was really working with all of those layers that of inner constrictions and conditioning and enslavement that only emerge when we start the journey. And then the fourth day was about revelation. So then I came to the fifth day of the retreat, which was about building the mishkan, the sanctuary in the wilderness. So the book of Exodus, there's a full third of the book of Exodus is about building the mishkan. And for me, it was a bit of a problem because this was for me the most boring part of Torah. And it's boring because it's just so filled with detail and what seems like repetition. And it's like you get the commandments to build, and then you build, and then yes, we built it. And it just seems to go on with those details forever. And I always kind of joke that I would go into this part of Torah and I would experience what I call longing for Leviticus, because I just couldn't stand it anymore. And so when I came to the fifth day of the retreat, I really wanted to find out why on our journey to freedom is it so much about building the Mishkan, a third of the book of Exodus. And that day was a day that changed my whole life, because what happened was I received the commandment, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. I received it in a whole new way, which means make for me a holy place so that I can dwell within, between, and among you. And I realized that this was the whole purpose of my life. And I understood that commandment in all different dimensions of it. So to build the Mishkan, I had to first find the inner space and invite God to come and dwell inside me. And I knew that building that inner space was my calling. I needed to also know my own body as a Mishkan, as a holy dwelling place, and be able to call in the divine presence. And I needed to sort of feel my energy field as a Mishkan, as a holy space, and work with building that field. Then I realized that every relationship that I had was also a Mishkan, that I could feel that I was creating holy space through a connection with something or someone else. And into that space, I could call in the divine presence. And then I realized that every group that I came together with was also a Mishkan. If I built it well and beautifully, I could call in God's presence. And ultimately, that was what I wanted to do with the whole world. I wanted my whole world to be a Mishkan, to be a dwelling place for God. And in order to build it, there are a couple things that need to happen. I need to find my generosity. The Mishkan is not built out of obligation. I needed to find my artistry. The Mishkan is built ultimately with all of my creativity and artistry and all the beauty that I could imagine had to go into that Mishkan. So that fifth day of the retreat turned out to be kind of formative for my life, of like realizing this is why I'm here, to create this kind of holy place as an artist. So when I looked at this Parsha this week, and we're in the midst of building the Mishkan, and the Parsha begins with the commandment that everybody needs to bring their half shekel, meaning everyone needs to find what's the little thing that is so little it's only a half shekel, but so big that the mishkan cannot be built without it. And it kind of to look at that feeling of both humility and absolute magnificence of my contribution and uniqueness of what my contribution is. So that's how the parsha begins, and bringing that question that I think everybody needs to ask is, what am I bringing, and where is it coming from in me? And there's this wonderful connection that is made between the mishkan and Shabbat. So all that we have of like how to celebrate Shabbat, it all comes from the Mishkan texts, because whatever we do to build the Mishkan, that's what we don't do on Shabbat. And actually Shabbat is about being in the Mishkan that we have built. So that line that we say, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael, that we sing for our blessing, Shabbat is the covenant, the sign of the covenant. It's it's really how we know that God has agreed to come into our Mishkan when we celebrate Shabbat. And it's kind of, like, remember that movie, If You Build It, They Will Come? So you need to build it. And once you build it, then the divine spirit can dwell inside. And that is, kind of the reminder that happens on Shabbat, that we get to participate in this covenantal relationship with God, who's saying to us, you build it, I'll come. Okay, that's the deal. So in this amazing Parshat Ki Tissa, there is this strange kind of interruption in the text. And the interruption is all about this thing that happens, this terrible thing that happens, which is called the golden calf, right? And so the Mishkan building stops. Moses goes up the mountain to receive Torah, and back at the bottom of the mountain, there's this kind of a disaster that happens, and the sin of the golden calf is considered the quintessential sin, like that. It's like sort of nothing is worse than the golden calf in our tradition, and it becomes a kind of archetypal mistake that we make. And so we want to, and then after this terrible thing with the golden calf, we go back again to building the Mishkan. So I wanted to kind of understand, first of all, this golden calf thing. To me, it didn't seem all that bad. I didn't really understand what was so bad about it. People were upset that Moses was gone for such a long time, and they wanted something beautiful to remind them of God. And this was what they, and it just kind of happened. It didn't, the way that Aaron describes it is like, I put all this gold in there, and the calf just jumped out, kind of, it wasn't my fault, right? But anyway, it turns out to be such a disaster. And I started to think about the juxtaposition of golden calf and Mishkan, and ask the question, well, what's the difference between a Mishkan and the golden calf? That became my main question. What's the difference? And I realized that the golden calf is full of itself. And the Mishkan only exists for the space within. The space within is what it's about. We build the Mishkan, but we're building it because of what comes into it, the invitation that building makes. When you build a golden calf, there's nothing but golden calf inside it, right? There's no space for God to dwell. And so I started to think about that when I'm building a Mishkan, I'm building a spiritual practice that can call in God's presence. Sometimes I realized when I think I'm building a mishkan, I'm actually building a golden calf. And it kind of happens almost accidentally, it's like, oops, you know, uh, and I tell in my Torah Journeys book, I tell this story about it when I realized I was, at a place I was singing a song. I was a performer. I was singing a song, but really what I wanted to do was build a mishkan, create holy space. And I sang this song, and it sounded beautiful, and the audience was really loving it, and the sound system was really good. It was a great microphone. And I went through the first couple verses, and then I had this realization, oh, Shefa, you're not building a mishkan, you just are building a golden calf, because there was no room for God in there. It was full of me, really. And by the third verse, I was able to get out of the way and create a mishkan again. And I realized how subtle it is. Because we who are involved in spiritual practice or religion or Torah, we're always falling in love with the forms of things. And ultimately, the form only exists for that essential quality of the divine to come and dwell. But we end up, with, Torah can be our golden calf. Anything can be a golden calf because when it gets full of itself. And so I want to just to stop here for a moment, just to say, what's your golden calf? What is the thing that you create that you mean to make a mishkan, and it might just become a golden calf accidentally, and I don't know if, and I think it happens with any kind of form that we create, that we can lose sight of what was the purpose of it to begin with, and we just get caught up in, the beauty or the perfection or the articulation of that form. So anybody wants to share, what does that stir in you about your own mishkan golden calf dance?
I think I've spent the last almost 30 years in a Jewish classroom, supplemental school. And I always say that my goal is to establish a safe community and do all that stuff. And sometimes what gets in the way is the lesson plan. If I the only focus that day is on the lesson plan, then it's not on the community. And it's not on building a sense of acceptance.
And there's no room for surprise.
Right.
Because you're trying to get through your plan. That. Anybody else?
Reb Shefa, I just came back from my second week of DLTI, and very similar to what Mary was talking about, when you're the Shliach Tzibur and you want to make what happens right for the Kahal, but you also want to be praying and modeling, it's very easy to get caught up in doing it right and having people like it. And it's sort of a constant struggle.
I've been doing this prayer that's called the welcoming prayer, and part of it says, I let go of my desire for security, control, and affection, and open to embrace this moment as it is.
Of course, the dilemma in that is, by doing that, you also do better, and then you feel like you did it better. It's kind of a circular thing in a way, isn't it?
Well, you keep doing it. You keep letting go. You keep letting go, because that desire for security, control, and affection is such a part of, how you build what's called the false self. But there's somebody waiting inside there to experience life differently. And I think that's that's when the mishkan appears. So the moment I let go of that desire that somebody else is going to like what I do is the moment when something else can come through. Is it Laura? Did you just
Yeah,
raise your hand? Yeah.
I was just going to say it's a struggle in the cantorial role.
Oh yeah.
You know, am I singing the right notes? Am I singing the right words? What's coming next? Can be all overwhelming and can overwhelm the kavanah completely.
Yeah. And I think that's the real work, you know, is clear. You know, it's like we want to build that mishkan. And every time I do a chant, I feel like I'm building a mishkan. I'm building a mishkan. I want it to be beautiful. I want it, and then I need to totally get out of the way and allow the benefit of that chant to come in. And maybe sometimes it happens in the silence afterwards. But I want to bring all of my effort and not forget that it's the space within that is, that I am creating with with all of this beauty. And if the beauty only points to itself, then I've failed. But if the beauty sends us to a mystery, that's the direction that I want to go in. I want to say that there's this, in the text, what happens is, Moses goes up the mountain. He wants to see God, and God says, "You can't see my face, but you can see my back." And the word achare is the word for back. It means like sometimes you can't see God's presence in this very moment, but if you look back, you see it was there. That's it becomes evident to you that you have been guided all along. And then God says, in answer to that question, to be able to see the divine presence, God gives us these 13 attributes, these qualities of love and compassion and patience. That's how we can experience God, is through those qualities, and we can embody those qualities. So, after this disaster of the golden calf, God kind of says, has this conversation with Moses and says, Moses, forget it. I'm not going to, these people are really, terrible. and Moses has this realization that says, the journey makes no sense unless you, God, come inside of it. Unless that divine presence is at the heart of my life, my whole life is senseless. Unless, that presence of God is between us, I don't want to even take this journey. And he says these words, Yelech na Adonai bekir beinu. Please, God, come within us, between us, among us. Because if you don't, no matter what kind of a beautiful thing that we built, if there's no space inside it for you to dwell, it's really, at the end of my life, I'm going to come to it and say, what was this all about? It's all the things that so he has this realization, and he comes down the mountain, and the Parsha ends with a description of Moses as radiant. I mean, he is shining light out of him. And when I'm so inspired by that idea of radiance. And I feel like when I invite God's presence inside me, that's what I can do. I can be a radiant presence in the world. I can shine that God light that I've invited inside. I can shine it out into the world. And I think that beyond anything we can say or anything that we do in the world, it's the quality of that radiant presence that will be the most transformative. And so I've taken, I think about this a lot of how do I find my own radiance? How do I step into the world and shine not my light, but the God light that shines through this particular refraction that is me. And how do I kind of get out of the way and allow that God light to shine out into the world? So I wanted to end our time together with this chant, and I think if you go to my website, you'll be able to find it afterwards. It's called Go Within Me, or something like that. It says Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. And even if, I mean, we can't chant together on Zoom, except if you're muted, you can chant with me. But I want to chant this chant as our blessing for each other, and to be able to just remember that we have that power to call in the mystery, to call in the divine light, and so that we can step into the world as radiant beings. Is there anything, Mark, that you wanted to add, since you're the real teacher here?
Actually, I wanted to add a little Torah, Shefa, that speaks directly to the conversation about not becoming the Egel Zahav, not becoming the golden calf. As we, and especially among the cantorial students who are talking about, and Scott returning from DLTI, of the danger and the risk of that happening when we start to appreciate how beautiful our voice sounds. So at the end of the Parsha, it says, Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and as Moses came down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, Moshe lo yada ki karen or panav. So that Moshe was not aware of the radiant light that was on his face. And that just leapt out at me, because that's right to the point of being in that place of radiance and yet not being self-conscious and acting from that place of radiance.
That unself-conscious is my freedom.
Right.
Really, to just be, to just allow and be.
So I'm going to give over to you for the chant in a moment. First, I want to thank everyone again for coming. If you want, I'm going to put on my website, rebmarco.com, many of the things that Reb Shefa has talked about tonight, including link to Go Within Me that she's about to offer us right now. Okay. Thank you all. Spread the word. This is delicious, and it's growing, so I'm very, very happy. Thank you. Next week, Andrea Cohn-Kiner will delight us with her Torah. Reb Shefa?
Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Once more, and join me. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbeinu.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.